Hi, let's talk about macro recording. It's a useful tool because it writes code line by line for every single thing that you're doing within your Excel workbook. So I can move around to different sheets, I can click on different cells, I can turn things different colors, and it will be writing code line by line for every single thing that I did. This means that later I can re-execute that code and have it run again and again and again. Now, it's not going to write the best code. I'm going to want to edit it later to make it more secure and more usable. But it will work for now if you just want to get started with writing Visual Basic. What I like to use it for is if I don't memorize some things, like for example, the color of blue. There's an index color associated with it, but I don't memorize any of these. So I can record the macro, get the information I need, and use it elsewhere in my code. And I do this all the time. Now let's go see what that looks like.
Begin by going to the Developer tab at the top and click on Record Macro. This is going to pop up a dialog box that lets you name your macro. We'll call it blue. And whatever name I choose, it should be descriptive of whatever I'm doing, but it also needs to start with an alphabetic character. It can't start with a symbol or a number. If you want to create anything that resembles a space within your macro name, you can use an underscore. You can also use a shortcut key to assign your macro to, but I actually don't recommend that. I think it can get very confusing if you have lots of different shortcut keys assigned to macros. So we'll look at how to do a button at the very end of this video. Click OK. And now whatever I do within this workbook is going to be writing code to mimic everything that I'm doing so that later I can go and execute it again. Let's just select a cell, E12, and then go to the Home tab, and we're going to color it blue. Now the code for writing color a cell blue, and specifically cell E12, is now being written for me. I'm going to click stop and then show you that code. To get to the Vba Editor, you can click Alt F11 on your keyboard. You can also access the Vba Editor as shown in the last video by going to the left and clicking Visual Basic from the Developer tab. They both work, but I think Alt F11 is much more accessible. What you see here is a module. A module is the space in which code will be written whenever you record a macro or when you're writing a procedure. Now, blue is the name of the procedure. It's here in the comment block. What you have here on the left is a tick mark or a colon, and it's called blue macro. The actual procedure name here is at the top, sub blue. Now the first line of code is selecting E12, and then this part might be a little confusing, but I as a developer was really looking for the color index. When I'm actually writing the code myself to color a cell blue, I'm not going to write this much code. So we'll talk about that in later lessons, how to just do something specific, but keep in mind, whenever you're using a macro recorder, it's probably going to write more code in a sort of inefficient way that looks really bogged down, but it's really not that bad when you're writing the code later, line by line. Now let's go back, and what I want you to do is rearrange these windows so that they're side by side. That way we can see both the Vba Editor and the Excel worksheet at the same time. What we're going to do is record a macro, and we're going to watch it record as we go. Now, if I didn't already have a module would be inserted when I begin the recording. To kind of demonstrate that, I'm going to select this module, I'm going to right-click on it, and I'm going to remove module. It asks me if I want to export the module before removing it. I'm going to say no, but if I wanted to save this for later, I could save a module outside of the workbook. So now I'm going to select a different cell. How about E5, and then go to the Home tab. Actually, go back to my Developer tab. Then click on Record Macro, and we'll start a whole new recording. We can give it a name again. Blue is fine. And if you were watching, you can rewind the video if you want. This section called modules just appeared because once we removed the module a moment ago, we had no modules, and so the section was gone entirely. Now we do have the section again. We can double click on modules and then double click on module 1, and what you see here is blue macro. There's no code yet because as I mentioned before, the single apostrophe means that this is just a comment line. That is not executable code. Now we select range E5, and you can see here it says range E5.select. Now if you go to the Home tab, nothing happened on the right because I haven't really done anything. Now I'm going to click on the blue color again, and you see that with the current selection, which happens to be E5, it has colored it blue. And again, this is the line of code that I was looking for, because who really wants to memorize 126.11584? Nobody. Okay? Something to remember, let's go ahead and stop that before we go on, is that as I'm recording macros, it often isn't very explicit as to which worksheet or which workbook the recording is taking place. So if I was to go to sheet 1, actually let's create a new sheet. For you, it might be a different sheet number. Mine is sheet 5 because I've been adding sheets to this workbook. I'm going to go ahead and create a button, and I'm going to assign blue to my button. Go up to the Developer tab, go to Insert. What you see here are form controls. The only form control I'm going to go over today is the button. This creates a little cross mark, which I'm going to click and drag. And it immediately gives me the option to create a macro name that's going to go with my button, but I also have the option to select from existing procedures that have already been written. Now, by default, this view is going to give me all open workbooks, but I recommend being very conscious to switch this view to this workbook, because it's usually the case that when creating and assigning a button, you want to select a procedure that's actually in your workbook. The view is the same here of the list of available procedures because I only have one workbook open. I don't have other macros available. But as you get more experience, you might have 5 different macros open and lots of procedures to select from. So remembering this for later can be very helpful. Select blue. Now I'm going to right-click on the button and select Edit Text. And let's call this Color Cell Blue. Okay, now I'm going to right-click again and, well, click on a cell just to get out of this selection version. That way the button is not active. Then you're going to right-click on the button and then click Assign Macro. Select the procedure blue and then click OK. Now when I click on the button, it should select cell E5, which is going to be right here. It's a little awkwardly placed next to my button, but it'll be fine. And it's going to color that blue. Now, the really awkward thing is that what if I wanted to color the cell blue that was on sheet 4? Well, okay, my macro recorder, it's not going to do that for me. And I'll show you this later in the syntax video, but if I did sheet 4, now the reference is much more explicit about which sheet and which range to select and then turn blue. Now the problem here is that when I'm saying to select something, that's really not very efficient code. So if I go here to the left, to where I can see all of my code, I'm going to select the reference, which is which sheet and which range. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to replace selection. I'm going to remove this line entirely, and at no point is anything going to get selected. I'll even remove this line here, so that I can refer to a specific sheet and a specific range and tell the code to color that section blue without ever actually going to that sheet or selecting a cell. So why don't we test this out? I'll go and remove the coloring from this sheet entirely. Now, something you'll notice, which comes up as a common question, is whether or not I need to match the case sensitivity in the sheet name when I'm referring to it in my code. The answer is no. In most cases, I don't. However, I think that it's a good habit to be able to remember when and when not to do case sensitivity, but at the same time, it might be a better habit for you to just be case sensitive the entire time. Especially if you try to switch to another language someday, it might be a bad habit if you've been ignoring this all along. So go ahead and make things match. Now let's go back to our sheet where we put the button. I'm going to click Color Cells Blue, and then we go back to sheet 4 and see what happened. And as you see, the cell was colored blue. All right, I look forward to joining you in the next lesson where we're going to talk about syntax.